it's my pleasure to introduce Marina Escalona-Poveda, who, like Hong, is also a product of Johns Hopkins, having gone there for her PhD, which she earned in 2017 in Near Eastern Studies, specializing in Egyptology with a minor in Greek. The fact that Marina was scooped up by the University of Liverpool as a now senior lecturer in classics and ancient history and Egyptology is not surprising, because while in graduate school, she identified a papyrus fragment in the Museo Biblique of Majorca that turned out to be the missing segments of two literary texts and really completely changed how we think of them. So I was fangirling earlier, but I really think that work was amazing. And then since then, she's done a tremendous number of things, but perhaps foremost is the publication of the Egyptian priests of the Greco-Roman period in analysis on the basis of the Egyptian and Greco-Roman literary and paraliterary sources. And I hear that this has now run fully out of print and is in need of a second edition, which apparently has never happened to the press before. Yeah. So that's wonderful. She's co-edited quite a number of edited volumes and has written a lot about astrology, magic, intriguing characters like Zosimus of Panopolis and the Egyptian priest Calisiris from Heliodorus' Ethiopia. So the title of her paper today is Rethinking Papyrus Rylands Dem 9 in the Scribal and Literary Culture of Saïte and Achaemenid Egypt. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for this very kind introduction. I'm a little bit, I don't know, I hope that this doesn't create tons of expectations, so be kind. The last one, I'm Spanish, and this is after lunch, so this is siesta time. This is really hard for me. And thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me. I'm normally working on astrology now, so it's really nice to go back to literature, which is one of my favorite areas. And I will be talking about a manuscript that is very dear to my heart. I've spent many hours with it. And I'm also preparing now a book on this text. And I'm very interested in hearing your opinions about what I'm going to present today. It's a collection of thoughts. And I think that this text hasn't received too much attention. And it will benefit from an interdisciplinary approach to it. So the study of Egyptian literature has seen in the last decades a lot of progress in terms of theoretical approaches, analysis of issues of genre, of definition, but still there are some texts that defy classification. And I think that the most prominent one of them is Papyrus Rylands 9. So there's still a lot to do with it, and it's a very good case study for the definition of literature that we have been talking about these days. The importance of this text has been recognized by many scholars. Here you see a quote from John Ray, a demoticist, and he says that Rylands 9 is the single most informative secular text to come down from ancient Egypt. And I didn't include the complete quote, but he says that if it hadn't been written in Demotic, it would probably have received more attention from Egyptologists. But because it's written, and he says, in this unprepossessing script, this has not been the case. I want to introduce first the materiality of the manuscript, especially because almost no one has seen the actual manuscript in recent times. It's a papyrus roll that measures 4 meters 25. It was never cut, so we still have the complete roll. It's written on both sides. It has 25 columns, 14 on the recto and 11 on the verso, and it's written mostly in the Demotic Egyptian language and the Demotic script, except for a short section at the end that is written in hieratic and in what we call Egyptian, the tradition. This is classical Middle Egyptian. Here you can see a diagram of what the text looks like. So this is the beginning of the text, and then if we turn here, then it continues all the way here. So we have a section that is not written on the verso, but it's a very short fragment. It's a very, very long manuscript. In terms of the contents, we can divide the text into 4 parts, and you can see that most of them are written in Demotic, except for this blue section that is the hieratic part. And in terms of what these parts are, the part that you see in red is what we could define as a frame narrative. And this is dated to year 9 of Darius I, so 513 BCE, and is narrated by a Petese, which we will call Petese III, because there are so many Peteses in this story as well. In this time period, it was a very popular name. Then part 2, which is the longest part, is what was labeled by Griffith, the editor of the Editio Princeps, as document B. And this is the family history of this Petese III, and it goes from year 4 of Psammetichus or Psamtik I to year 4 of Cambyses. So it covers 26th dynasty up to the beginning of the Persian period, which makes it really interesting. The part in blue, part 3, are copies of, hieratic transcriptions of what would have been 2 hieroglyphic inscriptions onto stela erected by an antecessor of this Petese III, so Petese I, at the temple of Teudjoi. And then at the end, we have 3 hymns inspired by the god Amun. Here we go back to Demotic. So I'm going to try to give you a summary of what the text is. And this is not an easy task, so bear with me, because it's a very complicated text. But if we start with part 1, so what we would call document A, it starts sort of in medias res. In the middle of the story, we have some Ahmose that arrives at Teudjoi. You can see that this is a town here in Middle Egypt. It's close to the Fayum. It's modern El-Hibeh. And he goes there to claim his priestly stipend, to which he is entitled, which he hasn't been receiving. So he wants to know what is happening. And what is happening is that this temple is bankrupt. So there's no money to pay this stipend. So he's trying to find out what's the reason for this. And he's told that he should talk with the temple scribe, a guy called Petese, son of Udjasomptus. He's the only one who can explain this story. Now, Petese at this point, or Petese III, is around 70 years old. He is not very willing to talk, so Ahmose tortures him to get this information. And then Petese tells the story. This situation comes from a series of injustices that happen against his family by the temple priests. When the temple priests hear that Petese has told this, they take revenge on Petese. They injure him, and it takes him quite a long time, several months, to recover. Once he does, he goes to Memphis to seek justice from the chief finance minister. After 7 months of insisting, and this reminds us of the eloquent peasant, he is heard, and the chief finance minister tells him to write a full story of his family. I mean, perhaps he just didn't want to listen to this old man and his story, so, just write it down. And this is what constitutes this document B that is embedded in the text. He only basically receives a promise of protection, is not very satisfactory, and discovers in the meantime that the priests have burned his house. So the whole document seems to be, and Griffith already mentioned this, a new petition to try to achieve something. So it's not very satisfactory as a narrative. So if we go to document B, so the story of these priests, his story is not very easy to follow. This is a 70-year-old man that goes on tangents very, very frequently. And so it's quite meandering. But using the genealogy, this is from Griffith's publication, I'm going to try to take you through what the story is. So we are going to start with the great-great-grandfather of Petese of Petese III. So this is Petese I. You can see here in red these antecessors. We have Petese III here, and this takes us to the beginning of the 26th dynasty. We are in year 4 of Psammetichus. Petese I is the cousin of this Petese, son of Hasheshonq. And this man was a pretty important person at the time, an official. He has the title of harbor master, and he appoints Petese I as his assistant. And as such, he's traveling through Egypt, assessing the state of different regions. And amongst them, he goes to this town of Teudjoi. He finds that the temple is in disarray, and he makes arrangements to bring it back to prosperity, and he succeeds. So as a reward, Petese, son of Hasheshonq, is going to reward him with the office and revenue of prophet of Amun, which is the main temple of this city. So in order to commemorate this, and this is a reconstruction of what the temple would have looked like, what he does is to erect 2 statues of himself and a stela. And of course, these are not the statues. It's just to give you an idea of 26th dynasty statues that are similar to what is described in the text and what a stela would look like. I mean, we've all seen a stela. But so he erects these statues and the stela in the temple to commemorate his position now. And then he returns to Thebes, just where important stuff is happening now in this provincial town. And what he does is to leave there his daughter and her husband to take care of the temple. Now, the priests of the temple are not very happy with this foreigner that has suddenly arrived to take part of the revenue of the temple. And after a series of disagreements, they kill the children, so the grandchildren of Petese. So Petese comes back, he persecutes the priests, and he puts his daughter and his son-in-law under the protection of the new harbor masters, Somtu Tefnach. These harbor masters are historical people. We have many attestations of them. But it looks like he's not able to fully punish the priests. And here comes the question of how much legitimacy he had apart from what he tells us in the text, to this position, and especially to transmit it in inheritance. So there is an agreement that is reached with the priests in which Petese keeps this fifth of the endowment of the temple, and he commissions a second stela in order to commemorate his priesthoods, and this one has more titles than the first one. All right, so then to ensure his transmission of this post, he's going to appoint his son Ujasamtus I as the successor to this office in Teudjoi, and passes the endowment to him. And there's some peace during this time, so Ujasamtus I is able to appoint his son Petese II, and Petese II in the meantime is called by King Psammetichus II to go with him to an expedition in Syria, Palestine. During that time, the priests take the chance to basically take over this income and redistribute it amongst themselves. So when Petese II comes back, he seeks justice in Memphis, but he is dismissed because the king is ill, and in fact the king would die soon after. So he goes back to Teudjoi, where there's some sort of agreement reached with the priests again. Now the conflict is going to resurface with his son, with Ujasamtus II. This is the father of our narrator of Petese III. And during the reign of Amasis, there is a conflict between the administration and the priests. And this requires Ujasamtus II to release his rights over this portion of the endowment, in order to do this, he flees the town and he goes to Hermopolis so they cannot catch him. But in the meantime, what the priests do is to destroy the monuments that Petese the First had created. So they throw the two statues to the river. They destroy the second stela. And the text is really interesting here because it says that because the first stela was made of granite, they're not able, the hieroglyphs carver says that he doesn't have the right tools to destroy the granite stela. But then they say, well, it's not in a very visible place, so never mind, just leave it. Which connects with what we were discussing yesterday of the visibility of some of these texts and who would actually read them and how they will be used. So the first stela remains, everything else goes either to the river or is no more. So Ujasantus the second then makes his son, our narrator Petese III, assistant to the scribe of the treasury. A scribe to the treasury that is called Imhotep, another very common name. And he goes to Memphis to make a complaint again against the priest. He's able to bring troops to Teudjoi, but an agreement is reached again by the priests. The priests are also bribing their way against Petese III. And what he just achieves is a partial reconstruction of the house, and he doesn't get the right to this prophethood, to this endowment in the temple. And here is basically where we connect with document A. Now, after this narrative, what we have is the hieratic transcriptions of the two stele of Petese the First, which you can see here. This is where both texts start with the word copy. So it's a copy of these texts. And then at the end, we have the three hymns to Amun. The interesting thing is that these hymns to Amun imply that the opponents of Petese are going to have some sort of divine retribution, like they will be divinely punished. So this is what the manuscript is. Now I want to introduce you a bit to what the modern history of the manuscript has been. This papyrus was bought by Lord Crawford in his visit to Egypt at the end of the 19th century. He purchased it with other 8 texts. So these are P. Rylands Demotic 1 to 9. It arrived in Manchester in 1899. And it was just there for the opening of the Rylands Library in 1900. It was incorporated to the collection, and all these papyri were placed between sheets of glass, and frames were made especially for these papyri, and they're still there. And they were hung to be seen in what we call now the education room. You can still see them there. They were published by Griffith in the Catalogue of Demotic Papyri from the Rylands Library, which is a masterpiece of Demotic studies. I mean, my mentor, Richard Jasnow, used to say that Griffith knew things that he had no right to know because we didn't know them yet. He knew the language so well. And, well, that's the Rylands Library, so it's a temple of knowledge. It's a cathedral of books. So if you haven't been to Manchester, if you go, please visit it. These are the other texts. So these are the other eight documents, which are mainly different kinds of contracts. And the first two, Rylands 1 and 2, are the earliest Demotic documents that we have. So it's a pretty significant group of texts. Now, in 1965, new photography, apart from the photos that had been taken for Griffith's publication, new photography was taken, and this is the best extant documentation that we have of these texts. And this is because 2 years later, the demoticist Eve Raymond decided that the papyrus was not in good condition and that she would fix it by applying a concoction of sunflower seed oil, gum arabic, and different other substances, which basically ruined the manuscript tremendously. It just turned black, so the text became invisible. There was consultation at Oxford at the British Museum, but no one dared to do anything with the manuscript. That was the state in which she left it. Then sometime between the 60s and the 2000s, the front sheet of glass shattered because the papyrus was stored flat. And then 2003 was placed in a wooden crate and stored away. So no one knew what to do with this text. So this is where we come in. In 2019, the conservation team applied for funding in order to conserve this very important manuscript. This was a project led by Elizabeth Carr, and they got funding from the National Manuscript Conservation Trust. And the idea was to assess the actual state of the manuscript and to develop a conservation strategy to try to at least save it from further deterioration. It was mechanically clean because it was full of little shards of glass it's a dramatic story. And because when the glass broke, many fragments of the text were detached from the manuscript. These were placed in archival folders for reconstruction. Multispectral imaging was taken to see if the text was still there, which it was. The ink was fine, it was just not visible. And an innovative 3-stage enzyme treatment was developed to remove the oil. This was developed just for this manuscript because there was no parallel case. So it was a pretty exciting but also unnerving process, especially because of the importance of the manuscript. And then all the fragments that had been detached needed to be reconstructed. And the frame, which in itself is also really interesting, was also restored. In my paper, you can find that link too if you want to read in more detail. I can show you some pictures. So that was the process for cleaning each one of the fragments. And the photo on the right, you can see the photography, the multispectral imaging. By the way, because it's such a long manuscript, it couldn't be taken to a laboratory, so we had to work inside the historical library. You can see here it was mounted on these tables, which are actually dog grooming tables because you can connect them and put them at different heights. You have to MacGyver your way into this thing. So that's how it was treated. Also, the room was closed and we had to check for humidity, temperature, and install different machines. But you can see this, it's in the historical library. And then the image on the right is this treatment with enzymes. And you can see how the oil, the papyrus after 50 years was still moist. So the oil was removed with this system. And you can see the text reappearing. So it was quite impressive. Then this is the part that I did. I had to reconstruct, especially the beginning of the text. There were hundreds of very little fragments. And because it's invisible, it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle in which you don't have an image. So I did it on Photoshop with the multispectral imaging and the images from the 60s. And then that's my hand. I reconstructed one by one the fragments. Now it's chemically stable, and this is what it looks like again. Now you can see that there are parts that are missing. These parts were lost when the glass broke and were probably thrown away. So every single fragment that had text has been reconstructed and has been accounted for, but at least it won't deteriorate further. So it's the best of what we could do considering the situation. In terms of editions, you have the first edition by Griffith, and Günter Wittmann published a new edition in 1998 with the German translation, but he was never able to actually see the manuscript because there was no point in seeing the manuscript. Since then, there have been some further German translations by Joachim Quack, Yannick Korte in the DPDP. The only extant English translation is still Griffith's. I'm preparing with Kim Riholt a new English translation. Günter Wittmann is also preparing another English translation for an anthology. And there is a French translation by Michel Chevaux. So what is actually this text? And this is what I want to discuss now concerning the manuscript. It's a very enigmatic text, has been the object of discussion. There are two main items of contention. What is the genre of this text? And are the facts and the events that it reports true? There has been a panorama of interpretations from considering a real petition to thinking that it's a work of fiction. If we start from it being a documentary text. This is the most prevalent interpretation. There is actually a document. This is what Griffith proposed in his Editio Princeps. He called it the petition of Petese III. And he said in the text, in his analysis, that a sign, but only a very slight sign, that the text might be a copy is that there is a correction. In fact, there are many corrections which Gunter Widmann has analyzed in quite a lot of detail. So now the issue is, we consider it a document, is it an original or a copy? As I said, there are many errors and corrections, and there is an absence of proper introductions to the sections of the text, so they wouldn't function as petitions in the way we understand them. We don't even know who the addressee for the main document is. Gunter Widmann has suggested that it could even be the satrap, and he thinks that obviously it would be unlikely that such a document would be sent to the satrap in this state. It was found in El-Hibeh, so it was not sent. It's not the original. So Widmann has concluded that it's the copy of a draft that would have been then gone through several corrections before being sent. Also, the way it's written, it would be very difficult to ascertain what the issue is with such a long text. Gunter Widmann has also analyzed the issue of the copies of the stele that appear at the end. These are dated to years 14 and 13 and 34 of Psamtik I. And this is quite interesting because the first stela, Gunter Widmann considers that would be a text modified from a royal immunity decree, probably emitted by Psamtik I and placed there in Teudjoi. This is the one that was not destroyed. And he says that the text that we have would be a royal text. It wouldn't be as the copy that we have something emitted by a particular, even just an official. So what he thinks that Petese III has done is to an original text emitted by Psamtik I, and having the harbor master, Petese, son of Hashishong, in a secondary role, he has replaced the king by the harbor master, and then Petese, son of Hashishong, by Petese I, therefore inserting his family member into this narrative. And then the second stela would actually be a fabrication by Petese III based on the text of the first stela to extend the titles. Now, the first stela doesn't have anything that would prompt the priest to actually destroy it, which makes sense that they didn't destroy, that they didn't care. And in the case of the second stela, because it's destroyed, no one can check. So Petese III could basically do whatever he wants. It does have a mistake because he attributes it to Petese, son of Hashishong, who was dead by the time the stela is dated. So if we can see that there's already an element of fabrication here, even if we consider that the text is an actual document. But interestingly enough, the text that he has made up doesn't really support his case that well. So there are many things that are irregular in this text. If we look at literary aspects, we seem to be at the boundary between literature and history. Vasetsky already said that this seems to be a family history written in a novelesque way as a novel. It reads very literary, and in fact, it has been included in most of the anthologies of Demotic literature. Quack and Hoffman, for example, said that it just gives us an idea of what Demotic text from this period would have looked like. Quack classifies it as semi-literary and highlights the literary aspects, so dispute over priestly stipends, which we see in many literary texts in Demotic. There's murder. There's a lot of attention to detail in the presentation of events that would be unnecessary in an actual document. And the narrator is omniscient. He knows things that are happening amongst the priests that he had no right to know. The non-literary elements, it was found with actual documents, with those 8 contracts, and the events span over generations, which is not the usual thing in Demotic narratives. Jackie J. in 2015 actually analyzed the literary language of the text, drawing parallels with earlier literature and also with later Demotic narratives. And she concludes that Petese must have used fictional narratives as models, and that she agrees with Widmann that it would be a petition to be revised and sent to the authorities. She also suggests that it could be a narrative catharsis, that he's so frustrated, but this might be a little bit too modern. And she considers that the ending with the hymns would be a positive ending. And then if we go all the way to historical fiction, Anthony Leahy said that, well, the next step, because the text is so irregular, would be to consider it a piece of historical fiction. My colleague at Liverpool, Chris Eyre, in his analysis of the use of documents in ancient Egypt, says that we don't necessarily need to consider it as a genuine document. It could be a literary fabrication. For his purpose, it doesn't matter. It can still be used as a source for documentary practice and even history of the time. And the most interesting publications in this sense are those of Jeremy Pope, another Hopkins person. And he leans towards considering a piece of historical fiction. He gives three possibilities. Could be a genuine petition submitted in good faith, but just very poorly researched. The second one would be a real petition manipulated to manipulate the historical facts, or a work of historical fiction composed using actual archival documents. And he considers the presence of the hymns, which wouldn't really work within a petition, would support this explanation. Now, in order to try to bring some light into this, we need to see it in its context, which is, I think, the thing that hasn't really been done that much. So the main problem for this is that we don't have any other works of Demotic literature from this time. The earliest Demotic documents are P. Rylands I and II, so those documents that you have seen, but the literary texts are the papyri from Saqqara from the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. But these appear already fully formed, so they indicate that there was a tradition earlier on, and we might need to look at texts that are not written in Demotic, but have sort of Demotic grammar, like Papyrus Vandier or the Brooklyn Wisdom text. And these represent an unbroken tradition with New Kingdom literature. But as Jasno has noted, there is actually a break in the literary tradition here. Some arguments have been that perhaps this is connected to the Persian conquest, to the destruction of libraries, perhaps also to changes in education. So we need to continue looking at parallels from the time. One of them, very interesting, is Papyrus Queen's College, which is still unpublished, but is the only literary text in abnormal hieratic. It actually has, it's too long for a document. It has many parallels with Rylands 9. I've given you more details in the written paper, so for the interest of time, I cannot dwell too much, but it has many parallels with Rylands 9. We have seen during these days the Aramaic history of Horizon of Pawenesh, which appears in the Sedne cycle and probably had a cycle of its own. The Sheikh Fadl tomb inscription, that even if it's dated later, it might have gone through different re-elaborations from the original in Aros. And of course, Herodotus. And the narratives that Herodotus includes seem to come from a priestly context. And actually, for many of them, now we have demotic evidence, like the story of King Pharos, which appears within the story of Peteses, son of Petetum, edited by Kim Richold, or the Sesostris tradition. So he was recording what was in the temple, in the libraries of the temple. The only library of a temple, though, that we have from ancient Egypt is the Teptunis Temple Library, which is from the 2nd century CE, but is very illustrative. It's in the Fayum. And interestingly enough, narrative texts are about a fourth of the preserved material. And the question is, why would they keep so prominently narrative texts in a temple library? Colleague Kim Richold has published extensively on this point, but he hasn't really discussed Rylands 9 at all in this context. But he considers that these narrative texts were not kept for entertainment. They were actually seen as historical records. The protagonists are always figures of renown. The characters are never fully fictional. And there is non-narrative material that is factual records. So they're recording history. So if these narratives are not history to us, that's irrelevant for how the Egyptians seen them. He also talks about the garbled chronology and names of kings. So there are no king lists in Teptunis. This would be different from what Manetho had done. So at the time of Herodotus, it seems to be a tradition that is not so connected to chronology. And the choice of rulers that appear in this narrative seem to be connected to surviving monuments, but also to periods of great national trauma, which is quite interesting. So if we go back to Teudjoi, and I'm getting to the end, Petese was a temple scribe, so he had access to whatever was in the temple library at Teudjoi. If we see what is left, what we have found in Teudjoi, the tale of Wenamon and the tale of woe were actually found in El-Hibeh. They were found in a clay vessel. I mean, by the Fellahin, this is the story, so we have to be a little bit cautious. They date to the end of the 21st dynasty, and they are presented as documentary texts, as a report and a letter, and they have some similarities. Like, there's a reference to Teudjoi in the Tale of Woe, the protagonists are priests, and the Tale of Woe is basically a Rylands 9 avant la lettre. So it's a tale of misfortune, and there's a plea for justice at the end. Now, Quack has made a very interesting point. What would have happened if P. Rylands 9 would have been found on its own or incomplete without the other documents? Would we consider it as documentary or as a narrative? So to conclude, I think that we need to step out of these strict categories of documentary and literary text, take more an emic perspective, how the Egyptians would have regarded this text. Wenamon and the Tale of Woe may have been accessible to the author of P. Rylands 9 and used as a model to create this narrative. He may have had access to other narrative texts that we know from Herodotus were already in circulation, and he had access to all these archival sources of the family of Petese. He recreates conversations and even that missing stela, so there's that literary aspect. And what is the purpose? Well, to chronicle the history of this prominent family in the city, which, similarly to what we find in Tebtunis, goes back to the beginning of the Saïte period and features some very prominent people in connection to this Petese I, this harbor master. So we have people of renown, like in the other narratives. The main objection to this has been the 8 documents, to considering it as a literary text. But if we look at the documents, they do mention some prominent individuals, but there's little connection to anything that happens in Rylands 9. They're not legally relevant. You couldn't use them to support the case, but they support this connection of the family of Petese with these notorious individuals. So I think that we really need to think more in context to try to understand this text. Thank you so much for your attention.